Welcome to an invitation to Sisterhood. We want you to join us on a journey as we discuss everyday issues affecting our lives. Women in the Bible and of Christian history continue to have an impact on the world even years after their deaths. We can learn so much from them. They are sisters of inspiration, and we're all sisters in Christ. Today we're talking about marriage. Our guest today is Dr. Tim Hogan. Our saints of inspiration for this show are Saints Louis and Zélie Martin. Joining me today are my co-hosts, ECRC Director Patrice Abona and Adora Ibrahim from the Benedicta Leadership Institute for Women. So marriage. We're all married.
Yes.
Adora is the veteran. We have to point to her. She's been married longest, right, Adora? How many years are you?
21 years in November.
So you've been married the longest.
Yeah. We're almost 4 years.
Okay, I'm almost 14.
Wow.
So we're all like...
You're up there.
Yeah.
You're hitting that 15-year
Yeah,
mark.
soon, yeah. So this is a fun topic.
Absolutely.
But it's a very broad topic.
It is. And it was interesting when we met and we were still brainstorming our ideas for different topics. This came up and all three of us at different, we just had so much to talk about with this subject. Yeah. So we're like, okay, we're inviting Dr. Tim Hogan. What are we going to talk about? We're like, just keep it general and see where the Spirit leads, because there is so much to talk about.
And it's so funny because when you go into marriage, there's a lot of people engaged today. Yeah. And it's like, I'm sure there's lessons to learn. I really do wish people told me some of this stuff before I got married. Not that I'm not happily married, I am, but you don't know what marriage is like until you really get married and you're like, oh, okay, this is what...
Absolutely. Talk about sanctification, right?
It's not the wedding day, as much as that was fun.
No, not at all.
I always tell my husband, I'm like, thanks, babe. He's like, for what? I'm like, you're my ticket to heaven.
I didn't even know that it was our role to get our spouse to heaven until after I got married. I was like, wow, that's a big responsibility. I don't want that anymore.
I was listening to Catholic radio recently, and one of the priests was saying how a nun was dogging him. She said, it's easy for you to be holy. You don't have to live with anyone.
Which is so true.
Yeah.
What would you say was a surprise to you guys when you got married that you're like, oh, wow, this is tougher than I thought?
Well, I would say for me, and probably for all of us, our families are different. We don't all come from the same background or, the same family of origin. Yeah. And so, maybe the way they did holidays were different than the way we did holidays. And,
the way they communicate.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that was probably the biggest thing, to see the difference and, to understand that, no, we all did not grow up the same way, So
that's a really good point. I remember early on in my marriage, the first one, Ronnie said to me one day, gosh, you and your sisters are so mean to each other. I'm like, we are? He's like, yeah, you're always yelling at each other. I'm like, yeah, but 5 minutes later, we're going shopping.
Exactly.
Because the way we talk to each other, my sisters and I would always call each other out if did something stupid or we're like, why would you do that? That's so ridiculous. And then we'd be arguing 5 minutes later, like, okay, you want to go to lunch?
Exactly.
And my husband's family was very different. They didn't call, they don't call each other out on stuff. So that was like a shock for him.
I think the hardest part for me getting married, and both of us are a little bit older. We were 29 and 30 when we got married, so we were so used to living on our own, getting everything we wanted, doing everything when we wanted, not doing what we didn't want, that kind of thing. So they say, oh, marriage is all about compromise. You're like, oh, okay, so sometimes we'll get sometimes marriage is not getting what you want. And that was really hard for me was, well, my friend invited me, I want to go. And he's like, I don't want to go. And you can only push so hard. And then sometimes you don't get what you want. So that was hard for me. And I think for him too, sometimes to have to do stuff he doesn't want to do for me. And I have to, it's all about balance.
And then when you have children, that changes too, because then you're parenting. And that's something we don't really discuss when you're engaged. It's like, well, what's going to happen when your kid wants ice cream for the 4th time this week? It's like, nobody discussed that, but that's a fight you're going to have. I just gave her ice cream 2 days ago. Why are you taking her to the ice cream shop again?
Exactly.
And then it sounds like a silly fight, but you will fight over stuff like that.
Or even good cop, bad cop kind of stuff. And sometimes I'm like, it's okay, leave her alone. He's like, you have to get my back, and it is about having that, united front.
Yeah, exactly.
Disciplining.
I will say this, marriage is not about you. Right? Yeah. So you get married and the two become one, and then the children come along, and everything I ever thought I was going to do or wanted to do literally went out the window. We set out with a plan, ha ha ha, if you ever want to make God laugh, go ahead and make plans, right? Yeah. and then, you get married and the kids come and, life takes you on this journey and you're like, wow. Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
And what was that quote from Bishop Fulton Sheen you shared with me a couple of weeks ago?
Oh, that was great. He said, don't get married thinking that your spouse is going to be your savior because they just might be your cross.
Woo!
And I thought,
yeah.
oh wow,
There's
what
so
a
much
what a
truth
great
to that.
quote. Yeah,
It's like
isn't
kind
it?
of funny because you're like, oh, okay, but it's kind of, it's just so true
Yeah,
too that
yeah.
you really can't get into marriage thinking this person's going to make me happy.
Yeah.
This person's going to do everything to make me
Yeah.
happy, because you have to become happy on your own.
Yeah,
too.
and you have to be
can't.
really, you have to be strong in who you are as a person, I think, before you get married, and not expect that person to be something they're not for you. You know what I mean?
And not only that, what we have to remember, and I wish we focused more on that during marriage prep, was that there's 3 of us in the marriage. You know, that God has to be the center of everything, and everything has to flow from there. And, you know, that's where we become the domestic church, right? The church at home. And I think that's so important. A lot of times we think, you know, we compartmentalize, you know, church on Sunday and this and that, but when you really act from that center, which is God, you know, things are easier. Not perfect, but definitely easier.
I think that's number one. I think if I had advice for anybody is make sure you married somebody who's grounded in faith.
Yeah.
Because anything can happen in life. Anything happens in a marriage. Anything happens raising your kids.
That's right.
If you're not both grounded in faith, you're
Yeah.
never going to see eye to eye. You're never going to solve your problems.
Yeah.
And I think that's number one. If that's advice I can give anybody, make sure you're married to somebody grounded where Christ is the focus.
Yeah.
Amen.
Because that will
and also
make
inviting
a huge difference.
that prayer into your marriage.
Yeah.
So when you're praying together as a couple, it helps you through everything.
Absolutely.
Through any good time, you know, it's even more joyful, and any bad time, it really helps to give you the strength.
Absolutely. And I tell my kids, you know, Luke and Christiana, of course they're still young, but even to put it in their mind, I want you to marry someone that's more in love with Christ than you.
Yeah.
And they look at me like, what? Yeah, let that marinate in your mind and in your heart and in your soul. Because if you guys can start off your marriage that way, you're on, you know, a much better level than those who don't have God in their marriage.
Or at least I would say an openness, because I think I always wanted that. I always wanted a guy that had this, you know, amazing devotion and faith. And sometimes it's hard as a female to find a male, you know, both
yeah,
sides.
yeah,
I've also
right,
met really faithful
right.
men that say, I can't find a girl either.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think as long as you're on the same page with openness.
Yeah.
So my husband wasn't necessarily as devout and practicing as I was, but he was very open.
Yeah,
So
'cause
he-
you can
he'll
bring
go
them
on
there.
retreats with
Yeah.
me, and he'll
Yeah.
he'll be like, you know, let's pray the Bible together. Like he's gotten there.
Yeah.
Because he's
That's
open.
amazing.
Yeah,
So-
that's so true. Well, we're
Yeah.
going to continue this conversation,
Yeah.
but add a fourth component, and that's Dr. Tim Hogan's going to join us. So stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. And welcome back to an invitation to sisterhood. We're talking about marriage, and joining us is Dr. Tim Hogan. Dr. Hogan, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank
Tell
you.
us a little bit about your history and your practice today.
Yeah, well, I get the chance to work at a place called the Grace Counseling Center, which is a wonderful partnership between Catholics and evangelicals on the east side of Detroit. And we do 2 things really well. One thing we do is we work with Christians who really want to stay grounded in their faith as they do their therapy, whether it's marriage therapy, family therapy, individual therapy. The other thing we do really well is we take care of people who don't have resources. So we have generous people who support us. We're a nonprofit, and we take care of people regardless of whether they have resources to pay. So those are the 2 things we do well.
Oh, so you're a 501c3.
We are an
So
independent
people could donate to you
501c3.
if they want to.
Absolutely,
very
yes.
good. So we're talking about marriage.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges with marriages today?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the history of marriage, and especially the history of marriage in the church, you realize marriage has never, ever been easy. Like you can't find an era in the Bible or in the history of the church where marriage has been this easy
That's
thing.
comforting.
Right? No, it's always been tough. And so the interesting thing is, we used to think the problem with marriage was you married the wrong person. You know, just 50 years
Yeah.
ago. And so we give people these pre-marriage inventories, and we think if you just find the right person, then you'll have a good marriage. And then someone had a really cool idea like 30 years ago. They said, that doesn't seem to work. So what if we tested really happy marriages and found out what really happy marriages had? And they started doing that. And what they found out was even marriages that are super happy have lots of problems. Like they fight. They don't resolve almost 70% of their differences 10 years later. So like if you take super happy marriages, it's like they never figure out how to solve some problems. So then the question is, so what's the problem with marriage? And the interesting thing, and this is what I love, is we find out that of all people to have the answer to marriage, Jesus, back in Matthew chapter 19, he says, you know, here's the deal. Marriage is really tough. In fact, at the end of that passage, people say to Jesus, if this is true what you're saying, Jesus, which by the way, probably is, because Jesus said it, if this is true, then who should get married? Like, who would want to get married if that's the truth? The truth is marriage is just really difficult. But the secret is what we do with our hearts. And so we were talking about this before, right? Like, what's the most common problem? Well, people come in with the typical problems. Oh, it's money, I feel controlled, communication. But the reality is, the challenge is how do we keep our hearts soft with our partner? And if we keep our hearts soft, then marriage becomes this crazy, wonderful adventure where we're being refined and purified and, suffer a little.
Oh,
And
yeah, a
by
little
that,
bit, yeah.
I mean, like a lot, you know.
You know, we went on this, I went on a marriage retreat last year. We've only been married 4 years, like I said earlier, and we had a couple that had been married over 40 years.
Yeah.
So over 30 to 40 years. And he was just very like, you guys and your love languages and your all this. He's like, let me tell you the advice. And all of us are looking at him.
Yeah.
And he's like, let it go.
Yeah.
He's like, let it go. He's like, if you're going to hold on to stuff, you're going to just keep fighting. And so when you say sometimes there's no resolution, that's comforting to know that sometimes, you know, me and my husband came from different backgrounds. We have different personalities. We're not always going to find a common ground. Sometimes you just got to be like, you know what, but I love you.
That's awesome. And I would say it's even worse than that. Not only did your husbands come from different backgrounds, but like you came from different worlds, like different cultures. I tell couples when you're about to communicate, think of it like this. You're going to cross over a bridge and visit an island, and it's the island of your wife. And your wife grew up in a different culture. She has different language. Different things have different meanings. We were talking before, like some people, when they're a little upset, they're like, hey, you hurt my feelings. In some families, that's a world war.
Yeah,
because you just don't say that. In other families, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
So you're crossing a bridge, and you have to learn all these new customs and behaviors and things that just feel totally strange. And so many people, you know, you get married in their first month, they wake up and they shake their head and they're like, what did I do? Like, this is a different world to live with this person.
We're working on this marriage prep right now, and so we interviewed a few couples, and one said that in her first month of marriage, her and her husband got into a big fight. She's like, I don't remember what it was about, but I went to leave. She's like, bye, I'm going to my mom and dad's house. And he slammed the door and looked at her and said, you're in this.
Yeah.
And I think that was so beautiful. Like, I mean, but it was beautiful to know that there's like a permanence to marriage that I think the culture has lost that a little bit.
Absolutely.
And I think, I heard once, and let me get your opinion on this. Do you feel like that it came from the culture of dating? They said, oh, when you're dating and there's a fight or a problem, you just break up, and then you date another guy, and then you break up. And then you bring that same culture of dating and breaking up into your marriage, where you think that if something isn't going right, we'll just break up.
Well, now they're doing these trial marriages. You heard about this, Dr. Hogan? These trial marriages, like, let's see if it's going to work. If it doesn't, we'll move on. You know what I mean? It's like there's no real commitment. And love is not a feeling. It's a decision. You're deciding to love that person, right?
I think, too, the sacredness of our vows is not taken seriously. You know, you're making an oath before God, before your community, to each other. Yes. And that's an unbreakable bond. And I feel like that's also just something that's not taken so seriously.
Well, and you know, marriage, all that stuff, and there's two things that hold people together. One are constraints, and the other is like passion, a feeling, attachment. And it used to be, you know, 70 years ago, that it was all about constraints. Essentially, if you divorced, you were an outcast, you couldn't get a job, no one liked you, you had to go live somewhere else. And then, probably in a good way, those things went away. But now people think passion can hold a marriage together. And any of us who've been married know that passion doesn't hold a marriage together. It holds it together for time. But then there are those times when you wake up and you take a deep breath and you say, this isn't like my lifestyle. Like, this is my vocation. This is my calling from God. This is, you know, I'm with someone, and by loving them, even when they're not lovable, by still providing unconditional love, that is something that presents a picture to the world of what love is. Like, marriage is, and that's what Jesus says. I mean, marriage is this picture to the world. And Paul said this too. You know, it's a picture of the world of love. And that's not like, oh, let me show you my pictures from Cancun. It's a picture of God's love. It's like, maybe, but the real pictures of love are, you know, my wife is going through a hard time, or she's going through menopause, or she's going through something. And suddenly it's like, okay, so that passion thing, there's not a lot of glue there. But wow, I have this opportunity to focus and learn and study and get to know one person. And, you know, love language is the beginning of it. But really learning, like, when she's in a bad mood, does she need me to show up and cheer her up, or does she want time alone? Like, I've learned with my wife that when she's having a bad day, I used to be like, let's talk. I love talking. And I overwhelm her, and she's like, you're making it worse. Now I've learned when she's having a bad day, it's like, why don't you get a novel and go read for a half hour, and then if you want to talk, let me know. So It's learning somebody, that whole ability to study just one person and really get to know them and learn what love looks like for them, which is very different than me. And then when people see that, you meet couples who've been married 40, 50, 60 years, and they've been doing that well, you go to tears as they talk about their love because, oh, that's what God's love is like. It's like, it's both beautiful and passionate and delicious, and it's also like strong, like sturdy, like.
And real.
And
I love the fact that the church in her infinite wisdom gives us saints for marriage. Recently canonized in 2015 by Pope Francis were Saint Therese of the Little Flowers parents, Zélie and Louis Martin. And they were just an ordinary family, a married couple who, had children. They suffered the loss of 4 children. They had 9 altogether. Wow. And 5 of their daughters entered religious life. But the thing that really struck me about them was the fact that they were business owners together. Even back in that time, they ran a lace making company. So Zélie would make the lace and Louis was on the business side of the entire thing. And I just love the fact that we have saints like that we can look to, because sometimes you think that a saint is perfect, a marriage is perfect. They're not perfect. What makes them, what gives them their sanctification is the fact that they get into fights, the fact that you change her diaper, the fact that you go out and you're going to make the meal tonight. It's just the everyday, ordinary life of marriage.
And what's so significant about them is they're the first to be canonized as a married couple, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that is really cool. Oh, I didn't know that. That's really great.
Yeah, they were canonized together, which I think is beautiful.
I love the fact that, Dr. Hogan, your practice is founded on a Christian faith. You know what I mean? Because to go through therapy and go through marriage, to have that when couples go to you. So is that a big part of that discussion when you talk about trying to make a marriage better? And can you incorporate the saints into your conversation with these couples? Bring on St. Louis and St. Zélie.
Well, I think what people struggle with, including me, is understanding where, we always say when you're in pain, it's like a light on the dashboard saying, prepare to grow. And when your marriage is struggling, it's like, prepare to grow. And this is called the fall. If we were in heaven, every marriage would be amazing all the time, but we're not. We're here. And so as my family of origin, which we know is so huge, butts up against your family of origin, and it really feels like you're wrong. You could communicate all you want, but at the end of the day, I'm feeling like, no, really, honey, this is what you're really wrong on this. When those moments come, those are moments where we can then turn to God. And, redemption comes through the truth of who Jesus is. And, I always say, when you're in a fight, you have 2 options. You can go to your friend who you know is going to take your side, or you could go get on your knees before God and just say, all right, God, I'm in pain. Show me my part. Even if it's only 1%, I want my 1%. And then pray for your spouse and pray for your spouse and pray for your marriage. And then watch what happens. It's a subtle shift. But so in session, that's a lot of it. Helping people learn to be together, praying for them together, helping them pray with each other is a big skill that I want them to take out of session with me so that they can do it without me.
That's huge. And Father Pierre was sharing with us for their marriage prep too that he's like, it's so funny how many couples are uncomfortable with praying. He's like, they're comfortable with lots of other personal stuff. They're intimate together. He's like, even bathroom stuff. He's like, but they have a hard time being intimate in prayer. So what's some advice you'd give some couples that maybe one of them is comfortable praying, but the other one isn't?
Great question. The first thing I would say is, first of all, this is like a huge, high leverage thing you can do. You have to be able to have some vision for how much this can transform your life with one another. And once you know that, then you can start really small. Like I say, even when couples are fighting, if you're going to bed angry because you're just too tired to figure it out, just say, let's just take a minute to pray for each other, hold each other's hand, and stay silent. Like, I'm praying quietly, you're praying quietly, and we know we're praying for each other, but if we say words, we're just going to bug each other. Like, if we start praying, the politics are going to come out of the prayer. Like,
I pray to God that you learn
Exactly. My wife and I, we were quite young.
That's hilarious.
We were in a fight. We just couldn't get through it, and she went to bed before me. I got there, I thought she was sleeping, so I was praying for her, and then I just kind of laid my hand. I didn't touch her, just on her head. I thought she was asleep, and I was praying for her. She said under her breath, "I am Legion." And which kind of broke the fight because she knew I was praying for her. So
That's great.
Yeah. So yeah.
You know, you bring up a really important point too. You got to have a sense of humor.
Oh my
Absolutely.
I thank
Yeah.
God that I have a really funny husband because he does
He's
break
awesome.
the tension with his
Yes.
humor. I
Yeah.
mean, you guys know my husband.
Yeah.
I mean, he will be in a heated fight and he'll say something so funny that I'm like, oh, I wish I wasn't laughing.
Right.
I wish I wasn't
Isn't that
laughing
great?
right
Humor's
now.
huge. You got to find a way. So you
Yeah.
look at what do the masters of marriage do? What do they do differently? They keep their hearts off. They find ways of laughing in ways that are appropriate.
Yeah.
They find ways of inserting positive things, like in the middle of a fight, just to say, hey, you know what? I know this is really hard, but I know we're going to get through it. So I know we don't like each other right now, but we're good together. Like we are so good together.
Yeah.
Or, you know, little secrets like that of even remembering, you know, do you remember that trip we took when we were in Florida? So great to be. I want to get back there. We can get back there. Like, so those are things that masters do. They laugh and they overcome our brain's tendency to see things in a negative light.
Yeah.
Tim, sometimes I say, well, a lot of times I say that our struggle really isn't against each other. We also have to remember the spiritual realm and, you know, the spiritual warfare that's constantly assailing marriage because it's in those times, you know, of the raising the children and the domestic church where all this goodness comes forth. And of
man.
course, the devil wants nothing more than to destroy that.
Oh my gosh. Well, we say marriage is a sacrament, so it's a visible sign of an invisible reality. And we know that, right? Like my parents were married 57 years. And,
Wow, God bless.
you know, that we watched them. My mom and dad were such different people. My mom loved to dance, and she was actually, you know, she danced. And when she met my dad, they both were interested in other people, but they just kind of fell head over heels in love and got married before the smoke could clear. Like, and then they would have these ongoing fights, but they would consistently walk hand in hand, go to novena on Tuesday night, mass on the weekends, go to confession. Like they had this rhythm of their life. And man, the last time I saw my dad alive, they came to our house and he was failing. And my mom took him out to the passenger side of the car and put him in the car. And they sat in the car, and the kids and I, you know, we stand on the porch and watch them. And he got in the car and he looked up at her and she looked at him, and they just paused and had this love in their eyes. And everyone was like, did you see that?
Wow.
We try to make everyone cry.
And they kissed her, and it's
Tearing
like, but like this is what the glory of God is.
Yeah.
These are two people who just kept, they had all kinds of reasons to divorce. In today's terms, they could have divorced. They went through all kinds of stuff, and yet they didn't. They kept loving each other. They just kept coming back. So then you get these researchers now who are like, what's the secret of marriage? And it's like, we're learning something we never knew before. Man, if people just soften their hearts, and when they're upset with each other, they find ways to talk in ways that aren't critical, attacking. If you just protect your heart from resentment, and you're listening to this stuff, and you're like, wait, I think I heard this somewhere before. I think there was this itinerant preacher 2,000 years ago who, Jesus was his name. We should go back and listen to Jesus because this is exactly what he says. This actually is, marriage is almost impossible, and it is, I think, without God at the center of it. You know, without that ability to soften our hearts in relationship with Jesus and, you know, to realize we are the forgiven and to walk into our marriage saying, look, you just really wronged me. And like, if we go to a judge, I win, you lose. But man, I have this relationship with Jesus and I wronged him and he forgave me. So I'm going to bring this to you. When we do that, and then our marriage, like you start showing this light and people get around you and you don't even have to say anything. The spiritual energy just exudes and people start saying, man, what Patrice and her husband, what's going on there? They really love each other, you know, and that's the kingdom. That's your preaching.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this for people watching, because we are in such a divorce climate in society today. Is it possible for one person, I mean, it's common where one person wants to save the marriage and maybe the other person doesn't.
Yes.
But has there been success where one spouse comes to you for a while and then eventually is able to save the marriage, like bring the other spouse? I mean, is there a way to start that way? Because there are people who are really trying to struggle to save their marriage, but they don't have the spouse on board.
Oh, and I think most marriages I work with, there's one person who really wants to save the marriage. And my wife and I call them the draggers and the draggees. You know, there's a dragger into every marriage therapy session, and they bring the reluctant spouse. And yes, so when people are struggling in a marriage, there are some things you can do, very practical. You know, it's amazing the power of appreciation and gratitude. And I know that feels cliche, but I coach people who are in that situation to get a gratitude journal going and ask God, remind me, God, of everything I'm grateful for, not just with my spouse, but with my family, with my life. And really become a more positive, grateful person. Because what happens is when the hearts get hardened in a marriage, then these negative cycles get going, and we don't realize, even though I may be unhappy in my marriage and I may think it's my spouse's fault, the way I talk about it with my spouse is actually keeping the downward spiral going. So, in fact, this is actually a trick, and I can share this trick with you. It's
Insider
a secret trick.
information.
This is really insider, and I learned this with my wife. Like, if we're just, sometimes you're not even fighting about anything. You just wonder why you don't like each other that day.
Yeah.
You're just like, no, I just don't got it today.
Get away from me. You do your work in there. I'll do my work in here.
Okay, so it hasn't happened to any of you.
Not at all.
But I have a friend. I have this friend, and they say some days they just don't like their spouse, right?
Yes,
here's a
I've heard
trick.
that before.
Yeah, here's a trick, is when you're with them, find sneaky ways to just start naming things you're grateful for. And don't start with the relationship or it'll be obvious, you'll be exposed and it'll break down. But just like I'll do that, like if my wife, we'll be in the car, be like, you know what, thanks for picking this car. And what I'm really thinking is, I didn't want this car, you did. But what I'm saying is, thanks, like I'm really glad we're driving an SUV. And I like it, or then, you know what, I've been thinking about the house we picked. Wasn't it a great choice to be in this house? I'm just so grateful. Or I was just thinking about our oldest daughter and how she works in the inner city and helps those kids. I don't know, I just been feeling grateful for her. And it's got to be authentic, but start with that. And then you can say, and you know what? I'm really grateful for this part of our life together. Or I'm really grateful for the way you decorated the house. Just start filling the air with gratitude, and the hearts begin to soften. And then you can have an opportunity to start talking honestly about the relationship. If you jump into the relationship when things are tough, it's going to stop because the hearts have been hardened.
It's almost like, it sounds a little silly, but almost like stroking the ego a little. Like, like building that other person up so they know that they're...
And as long as it's authentic, there's nothing wrong with that. Because then, our brains, we have brains that when I get to heaven, we're going to have a talk. I want to talk to God about this because...
I have those too.
I know, I'm making my list.
Same.
I'm hoping Jesus just says, go to the seminar and then come talk to me, right? But I think one of the things that makes our difficult is our brains are wired to scan for and notice negatives 5 times more sensitively than we scan for positives. Wow. And you've probably noticed this, right? Like if you, I don't know, like, you come home at the end of the day and, you might mention 3 things. Like you might say, oh, honey, it's a Saturday. Oh, honey, thanks. You cut the grass. It's so nice. Oh, man, you took care of the kids. What a great dad. I know dads who don't do that. Boy, that's great. Hey, you said you're going to clean up the kitchen. You didn't clean it up. I wonder what happened there. But, and look what you did with the family room. That's so great. And then you look at your husband. What's he going to be like?
Or he's going to remember the fact that you just said.
What'd you say about that kitchen?
Yeah,
Like, why don't you take the other 3 or 4 and blow off the one? You can't. Our brain
Yeah.
is wired. So because of that, we actually have to be intentional about praying and being grateful and noticing the positives and affirming. So it's sort of stroking the ego. It's also just keeping our brain online.
Well, we end our day, I'm sorry, Patrice, we always end our day saying, what are the things, what was a great thing that happened today? And I never say I always say, well, if you could have changed something today, what would you have done differently?
Yeah.
So I kind of put it the responsibility, and I think it's just a great way to go to bed. It's like, to think about the positive, and it was just something me and Ronnie and Elena do together, all 3 of us. We're like,
that's
okay,
so
what was great about today? What did you love about today?
Isn't that great?
Yeah, kind of like St. Ignatius
Yeah.
Examen.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely.
And,
Couples' lives change and my wife and I do that. Before we go to bed, we call it 2 wins. What's 2 wins from the day? And then we pray and thank God for the wins. Absolutely. You can also do that at the start of the day because the emotions that you have in the first 10 minutes of the day
That's a good
are
point,
predictive of your emotional life the rest of the day. So if you can wake up and start talking positive to yourself. And we wake up and say 2 things you're grateful for about today. My wife and I do this if we wake up at the same time. And then what I used to do with my kids when I'd wake them up, I would do that. I'd wake them up and I would say, boy, I think God's got something really special for us today. I got a feeling it's going to be a really great day. And when they were really young, they thought, oh, Dad, and it was really fun. Now that they're in their 20s, they say, shut up. No, really, Dad, we think
You're
that's really
preaching
stupid
again,
now.
Dad.
I know. You could have let that go 10 years ago. But to start the day
That's
that
a
way.
great idea.
And it's because the brain is waking up saying, is it safe or is it not safe? And if we have that one person in our life, if we become the face that says, hey, you're okay. It's going to be a great day. We have a great life. Then we will our marriages will more and more be strong and solid on solid ground.
There's this one quote, I think it's from the South. It's like, it's a good day for a good day.
That's great.
That's a good. What do you think is the cause of marriages falling apart? I mean, is it becoming so norm? I mean, we look to Hollywood, and it's like it's great to have 3 marriages and 5 kids, and I mean, what is it?
What could go wrong with 3 marriages and 5 kids from 2?
So I mean, going back to the fact that you have that faith foundation, but is it because we're going into marriages with a lack of that faith? We've taken God out of everything in the world today that that contribute to the family life falling apart?
Yeah, I can just answer that from, there's probably some great epidemiological research to answer, which I don't know about. But I can tell you from my office, I think there are some cultural trends that make marriage much more difficult now. You know, I certainly have seen more than I would have guessed. My share of couples who've come in because one of the spouses has found their ex on Facebook, or, you know, I think we're so bombarded with images and stories that we walk around feeling like it should be better than this. You know, it should be more like Brad and Angelina, or it should be more like, or we're just always on Facebook. And like I noticed, I have stayed away from that for so long. And finally I'm on Facebook, and I actually made a mistake. I meant to like not accept a bunch of friends, but
I accepted.
Yeah, by mistake, So now then everything just went crazy. Now every childhood, high school friend, grade school friend, now they're all on. But you know, some of those people are people I've been in relationships with, and it crosses my mind. Oh, I wonder how they're doing it. A part of me wants to click on them and say, how are you? And it's like, of course I'm not going to. But like, I think it's easier to get distracted. I think that's on the surface, that's what happens. I think underneath it, I really think it's about our heart. And I really think when we let resentment build toward our spouse at any level about anything, even if it's just one dimension of our life, like about money or about parenting or about our sex life, like if we let resentment build, that's what Satan's going to use that as the open door to slowly poison the whole relationship. So we really have to get relentless about getting the resentment out of our life. And that's what Jesus said. He said it, you know, in several places. He said it's the hard heart. That, you know, Moses allowed divorce because of the hard heart. That's the issue, when our heart's hardened. So, and I'll just say this, it's free, so I can promote this. This is such a deal. What I used to do with couples is I'd have them, you know, turn their phones on, and I'd record this meditation for them that integrates coming to God and also using research about how to soften your heart and increase compassion. And I was doing it for so many people. Finally, I know someone in the recording business, so I went out to Seattle and we did a recording of several meditations, and that's one of them. And so people can actually get that free. It's on YouTube. It's
what is it called?
It's called Releasing Resentment, and you have to search Dr. Tim Hogan, Releasing Resentment. You can also go to drtimhogan.com and see how to connect to it there. That's an easy place to get it. But it's free. It's on Spotify. It's on YouTube. You can also buy it if you want, but people don't anymore, which is great with me. I just want people to listen to it.
You know, you said something that struck me, relentless. You know, we fight so hard for so many other things. You know, our jobs, you know, our children and all their activities, our social status, our this, our that, you know, and we need to have that same attitude towards our marriages. And three things keep popping into my mind is that we have to constantly plug into the grace, right?
Yes.
And we have to constantly have gratitude for the littlest thing, because, you know, we're blessed. We live in America, for goodness sake. You know, there's so many people who don't have the opportunities we do. And the other thing is the sheer grit and determination.
Yes.
You know, you just have to fight for, you know, your spouse. You have to fight for your children and for the sanctity of marriage. And another thing that we talked about earlier was that sometimes people say, you may be the only Bible they ever see.
Yes.
You know, or read. They might not crack one open, but your marriage just might be that testimony to some of these younger kids who are growing up with no faith affiliation.
Absolutely.
To go, why are they so happy in their marriage?
Yes. Well, yes. And to realize how many people are watching Christians in their marriage. It really is. It's the one active relationship people can see. Right. You know, you can, so absolutely. And can I just say one other thing? Sure. So one thing would come up normally if I was doing this, we were doing this in a large group of people. You know, there might be one or two people who are in a really horrible, hellish situation, you know, where they're being physically hurt or they're being forced into painful things that they don't want to be a part of. Right. If people are in that situation, you really need to reach out and start with your parish, start with your priest, if you need to go to some kind of shelter type place, because you can't work on a marriage if someone's being physically violent. Like there's never an encouragement for that. Some people mishear what I say, like I say, oh, it's going to be brutal, it's going to be painful. Not like that.
No.
You need to have your respect and dignity. Once you know you're not going to be physically hurt like that, now you can say game on, even if it's painful, I'm going to keep working at it.
Or the kids physically hurt.
Oh yes, absolutely.
You know, there's some spouses may not physically hurt the spouse, but they're physically hurting the kids.
Yes.
So that's a whole nother ball game.
Well, and the reality is, it's not loving to your spouse. If your spouse is being violent and you're going along with it thinking that's love, that's really not love, because they're doing to their own soul is not good. So what they need is a dose of reality. And that's what's beautiful about the community. You don't have to do that on your own. Start making phone calls, start reaching out, ask your priest who to talk with some Christ-centered people, and God is ready to do a change. Yeah.
Do you believe, Dr. Hogan, that majority of couples that do really want to salvage a marriage, it's salvageable? Do you think we get out too quick? I mean, do you think that majority?
Yeah, I feel strongly that people bail too quickly, and I say that because I believe it. I did my dissertation in marriage. I really believe marriage is a super difficult, but as the article I just published in Human Development magazine called it a pathway to purification. And I'm
that's
laughing.
exactly what we said.
I'm laughing because they asked me to write an article on marriage, and I think they're expecting something about love and attachment, connection, which is my thing. And instead it was like, no, actually it's sort of brutal. And it's pretty painful.
What was your reaction to that when the editor at the magazine was like, okay, thanks?
Yeah, well, they said that's a little different, but go for it. I mean,
Okay,
you're the experts, so go ahead and write about it. But because I think a good marriage, in fact, my mentor, Harville Hendricks, who wrote the book Getting the Love You Want, which is a book, he believes what our brain does is we fall in love with someone who reminds us of the worst characteristics of our parents. So on the surface, we fall in love, but that deep feeling we get that says, oh, I'm so in love, I want to get married. What turns out over time is like for an example, so I grew up in that family, 9 of us, 7 kids. I was the youngest of 7 with 6 older sisters. And
that's amazing.
I know, right? And I had 2 parents who were super active in the church. I mean, they were the saints of our church. I mean, they call my mother the Blessed Mother, which is a whole different thing, actually. The Blessed Virgin is my mother. It adds a whole different emotional tone, right? So she's amazing. But they were also pretty busy all the time with church stuff. And so if I had anything like a wound, it was, she was doing God's work. But I've gotten over it. But, so I married this woman, Karen, my wife, who's awesome and amazing and incredible. And then 2 years into our marriage, I'm like sad, and I'm getting really upset with her, and I'm like, what's going on? Because it was stirring up that wound. She tends to be super active in ministry. And the good news was, though, and this is the deal, it's a path of purification. So God is saying, hey, that sadness you couldn't express when you were a little boy? I thought I'd help you find someone who could wound you in the same way, which now helped. I was able to find the words, and she was able to bring compassion. And the truth is, just like I love my mom and dad and are proud of them for all the work they do, I love my wife and I'm proud of her, but I had to work through that. So we do that.
That's incredible. I had never, you just
I'm
stirred
like,
up a lot of stuff in my head.
Can we hang on?
All these connections.
Can we have a therapy session? Just stirred up
Very profound.
That's
And
really
actually, that touches on advice that I've given, some young moms. And we might have even talked about this before, the 3 of us, and that's just it. Not leaving your domestic family because you're going to do something good for the church or this ministry or this, volunteer thing. And that is,
charity starts at home.
Yeah, focus your attention at home. And if you're
agree.
spending too much time away thinking you're doing something good, that, sometimes being distracted with good things is not good.
You gave me that advice. One time I was lamenting because I used to be so involved in ministry. And then once I got married and my husband is like very needy, which I love, but like sometimes it's hard for me because and then now with 2 young kids and one on the way. So he's like, he gets frustrated when I'm always out. And I went to Adora once. I said, it's really frustrating because every time I have a meeting, I have something, it's like this cause of conflict. And she said, your first vocation is wife and mother.
Yeah,
and I was
true.
like, wow, okay, so my vocation is no longer to do so much ministry work. It really is as wife and mother.
I think it's such an important thing when we get reminded by that by either our friends or our spouses. But Elaine and I have little bets we do. Like we'll say, oh, how much do you want to bet that Oreo will be right by the door when we walk in our dog? Or how much do you want to bet Daddy got a really bad haircut today? Or like what I meant. So the other day we bet funny stuff. Like, okay, I'll say, Elaine, you have to fold 1 load of laundry. And she's like, well, Mom, you have to let me watch 1 episode of television or something. So the other day, and it was like a rude awakening, she said to me, we were betting about Oreo, and I said, what's your bet? What's your wager? And she goes, you cannot look at your phone for 1 whole day.
Ooh!
And I was like, what? She goes, you have to put your phone away, and you can't look at it for 1 whole day. And I was like, wow, what a rude awakening that is to me. Like, she paid attention that I'm distracted by my phone. And it was like really a wake-up call for me as a mom and as a wife. And I'm like, I went to Ronnie, I said, am I that distracted by my phone? He's like, are you serious? Like, you're seriously asking me that question? You don't realize that. Like, you don't realize, like, even though I think I'm doing good, I'm like, well, this is like, the church called me, or ECRC needs something, or this, that. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? You justify it in your head, but really it's,
well, and here's the thing.
Or
the
it's my
question
job,
is,
or.
like, how do you heal if you're feeling disconnected from your spouse?
Yeah.
Like, we have to activate our brain. And one of the ways to activate our brain is eye contact. So, couples, one of the simple things I do with couples when they come in, and it's sort of a cruel experiment to see how they're really doing, is I have them kind of get close and they kind of go knee to knee, and I ask them to hold on to each other's hands in a certain way and close their eyes, and sometimes we'll pray or whatever, and then I'll have them open their eyes. And I'll say, just stay in your partner's eyes for a while and see what happens. And
super awkward.
for some people, it's super awkward. But the key is, if it's not awkward, oftentimes couples who've been fighting for 2 years will begin sobbing because, we're wired, that God wired us through our eyes, in through our deep limbic system. When we get around 18 inches apart, that deep eye contact activates this sense of connection. Like suddenly our brain says, wait, you're in my care. Like, oh my gosh, and I'm in your care. That's like a physiological way we've been wired. And so with our kids, what you're saying is your daughter might be thinking, hey, I'd like those eyes on me, not on your phone.
Yeah.
Because eye contact, and we know that. We tell people that, when you shake hands, make good eye contact. But with our partner, how much time and what a difference it makes just periodically to take our partner and kind of take their cheeks and look into their eyes and say, you're mine.
Yeah.
I am so grateful that God gave you to me. And then hug them. Like that just does this wonderful wash of goodness through the body. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I have a partner. I'm in one person's care and they're in my care and we're in the foxhole together. And, this is the way it should be.
Yeah.
So,
We have about a minute or so left here, Dr. Hogan. Before we let you go, is there anything that you want to share more with our viewers today about marriage, or any last words of advice or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say this. In Pope Francis's most recent encyclical, his letter to us on holiness, I love, it's such a beautiful letter, but one of the things he says, the key to holiness is start where you are. Like start with today when you go to the grocery store. Holiness means when you get in a conversation and it starts going to gossip, pause and say something that's a blessing. So wherever we are, take a deep breath. It's okay. God's at work. Think of one small way to move in a positive direction. That's the only way this happens. And for goodness sakes, let's stop comparing ourselves to other people and other marriages, because that's not how God works. And that's what Pope Francis is saying. Like,
so I can't look at Kate and Will. This is Kate and Will. Say, oh, she's a hairdresser. She's a cook.
set your timer. 3 minutes a day you can compare if you're really bad for yourself.
Out of the hospital after delivering a child looking flawless.
I know. I'm just saying. I know. Someone who has someone to do their hair and makeup and everything for them.
No, that's a great point.
No, it's a great point.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hogan. It's a
Thank you.
pleasure to have you on.
Oh, what a privilege to be with you
wonderful
here. Thank you for all the work
We're
you're doing
used to being
here.
around sisters. So.
Yeah, right. I know. This is home for me. It's like being back home with.
Hope we didn't open up any wounds.
I know. I'm going to stop at my therapist on the way home. So it's
Well, you definitely gave us a lot of fruit for thought. I mean, really great information. Thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
Stay with us, everyone. We're going to continue this conversation, and we're going to, as always, share with you our pledges for this show. We'll be right back. And we're back, finalizing our show on marriage. What a great conversation.
Wow. What great
Was
advice.
he awesome or what?
Yes.
He's amazing.
Yeah,
he's
he
just
is.
one of my
Great
favorites.
choice, Adora.
Yeah.
That wasn't me. That's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
We're connected all so closely.
Yeah.
And I've seen him work wonders with people's lives, and I just love it. And I think when you're plugged into that grace of God,
Yes.
and everything that you do comes from that.
Yeah.
It just adds that element that is just supernatural that we so need.
And I think it's beautiful that his practice is faith-based. And we have already talked to a spiritual director and done a show on spiritual direction. And so we had talked about, well, what's the difference between spiritual direction and counseling? And now to see the other side of it, I think was really beautiful. It kind of brings it all together.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
science and the faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He really had my mind
Going.
rolling there when he was talking. I was like, ooh, I mean, he said so much. I can't wait to go back and watch it.
That's right. That's
to
right.
absorb it again, because there was so much great information.
Yeah.
We have to have him back on again.
And in
talk
fact,
about-
what just popped into my mind, Vanessa? We should have like a night where we play it and have all couples come together,
that's
or
a
the
good idea.
or even your marriage prep program. Watch the show. I just think he's got so much to give to our married
does.
people and
Yeah.
to
I
families.
think his point about resentment resentment was really big.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
really huge. And even like his little tip about, just sneak in compliments, sneak in, because and it's so true. Like I can imagine right now doing that with my husband if he's grumpy, being like, this table was a really good choice. This one table that he's so proud he picked out of in our house. And I can see how that would work. And those, this or that,
But
the
now
little
he knows.
things.
Now he knows you're going to do that.
Well, I won't let him watch the show. I won't let him watch the show.
You're going to have to fast forward this part.
He's a great. You're right to show this show, and not just to promote Invitation to Sisterhood, but really to the marriage retreats that you do here at ECRC, Patrice. I mean, there was so much information that I think is so fruitful.
Yeah.
And that the people could take that information. I know you're going to share our pledges, Patrice, but to take that information and work on that piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Work on that. Like I love that advice of, the compliments. I don't think we do enough. I know I don't. I mean, I don't do enough of that.
And then when you hold that negativity, whether it's resentment or other negativity, and it becomes that downward cycle, I'm like, that's so true.
And I think what's so cool is that when you add the science part about it, when he said that our brain recognizes negativity 5 times more than it does something positive.
Yeah.
So you can list 10 positive things, but say one negative thing, and then you hone in on that negativity. And you're just like, wow, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
And 2, I think, the awesome part is the whole spiritual battle of it. He also understands that. And so he's able to help you.
Which a non-Christian therapist wouldn't get.
Exactly. And he's able to help you and say, okay, guys, remember, this is something that Satan does not want to see, a happy marriage.
Yes, a Christ-centered marriage.
That's right.
And that importance of prayer as a couple, prayer
That's
together,
right.
prayer individually for each other and then together.
Absolutely. And that people who have been married 40, 50, 60 years, you know what? They didn't, always love each other. They weren't always, singing and dancing in the rain together, that they went through the hard stuff.
Oh my gosh, I was trying so hard not to cry.
Yeah, the tears definitely welled up.
But it's so true. Like I have a friend whose parents, they've been married again like those 40 and 50 years, and they said, we've had good years and bad years. I'm like, years? Like, and as a 4-year married, I can't imagine. Like, at this point, it's 1/4 of my marriage.
Yeah.
But to think that you, in your marriage, will go through such tough times that they could last that long.
True story.
But you have to just endure.
Yes.
Because it isn't about, it got tough, so we'll just walk away because, this thing happened, so no one can blame me.
Or
for
marrying a
walking
spouse
away.
that is similar to the wounds your parents created. That really
that was profound.
Whoa, that when he said that, I was like, you've got to be kidding. Oh my gosh. The traits of your parents that caused wounds as a child, you end up marrying that spouse that has that same trait.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the need for healing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That need for identifying. Yeah.
Detachment. One priest said to me once in confession, he said, make your spouse God. Because what you need to understand, Adora, is that, not to be so attached, that they become your center. God is your center. And then your marriage flows from there.
Yeah.
And I just love the part where he said, it was a time of purification for him.
Yeah.
And he was saying that, God was telling him, okay, this is how you need to be healed. This is how you need to be purified. Wow.
Yeah.
That was
Very,
incredible.
very profound.
Yeah.
I do want to read this prayer that Adora shared with us. It's going to be part of ACRC's marriage prep because I just think it's so pretty. And I know it's
beautiful?
You didn't write it. I know you're just
No,
sharing it,
yeah.
but it's a great marriage. And it says a marriage prayer. Lord, help us to remember when we first met and the strong love that grew between us, to work that love into practical things so nothing can divide us. We ask for your words, both kind and loving, and for hearts always ready to ask for forgiveness as well as to forgive. Dear Lord, we put our marriage into your hands. Amen. What a beautiful prayer. And what a great way to end the show. But as always, we have our pledges because, we always want our viewers to take home something. We know we're going to definitely take home something. But
Easy to talk, but let's do it.
Yeah. And so we really try for you to identify 3 to 5 things that you can take home that we're going to take home too, and meditate and pray about these things. So Adora's going to share our pledges with you today. But thanks for watching, and here are our pledges.
I pledge to surrender any resentment to God and allow Jesus to soften my heart to my spouse. I pledge to allow grace, gratitude, and grit into my marriage. I pledge to be relentless in prayer for our marriage as individuals and together.